There is a part of the gospel that is almost never taught in depth, and it's not by chance. It is not just about salvation, forgiveness, or blessings, but about spiritual authority, government, and direct confrontation against the kingdom of darkness. This is the kind of revelation that doesn't please hell, because it takes man out of the victim position and puts him back in the place of government that God planned from the beginning. The gospel that Satan wants to hide is not the one that makes you feel better. It is the one that makes you see better. It is not the one that only comforts you. It is the one that positions you. When this light turns on, the Christian stops being a spectator and becomes a conscious participant in spiritual warfare. And that is exactly why this understanding is almost never presented clearly. Stay until the end, because what comes next can change the level of your faith, your spiritual authority, and your vision of who you truly are in God. There is a kind of truth that isn't learned on the surface. It only reveals itself when the mind slows down and the heart begins to listen. Right from the first pages of Genesis, it becomes clear that the creation of man was not a mere detail within God's work, but the center of everything. Nothing was improvised. Nothing was rushed. Human life is born from a plan that was already formed before time existed. This understanding changes the way we see our history and opens up space for something greater. As consciousness expands, we begin to realize that heaven, earth, and humanity arose within a perfect order. The Gospel of John reveals that everything was created by the Word, and nothing existed outside of that command. This leads us to understand that our existence is not the result of chance, but of intention. There is a project behind our breathing. And when this truth begins to be absorbed, the heart prepares itself to understand something even deeper. The most impactful thing is realizing that God did not create man out of necessity, but out of desire. In Psalms, it is written that our days were counted even before we lived the first one. This reveals that we were thought of before we were formed. We are not the result of chance. We are the result of a divine decision. This awareness starts to push us toward a more central understanding, who we are within this plan. It also becomes clear that man was the high point of creation. Genesis shows that everything was prepared first: light, land, seas, plants, cycles. Only then was man formed. This reveals care, strategy, purpose. We were placed in a ready-made scenario. This perception naturally generates a question that leads us to the next level of revelation. In silence, an inner question is born in the heart. If all this was planned, if our creation was so intentional, then according to which model were we made? This question is not common, it is spiritual, and its answer leads us exactly to the next point. Understanding deepens when we realize that our creation did not follow just any mold. Genesis states that man was made in the image and likeness of God, and this goes far beyond mere appearance. There is spiritual identity in this process. There is an essence that was deposited within us. This realization makes our mind understand that there is something within us that comes from an eternal source. The revelation gains even more clarity when we arrive in Colossians, where it is said that Christ is the image of the invisible God. This changes everything. Our mold was not a concept, it was a person. The project of man was never generic, it was always specific. From this, we begin to understand that our Christian life is not just about behavior, but about alignment with this image. This truth starts to work within us when we read in Romans that we were predestined to be conformed to the image of the Son. This touches deep. We were not just called to believe, but to become like Him. Faith stops being only a religious practice and becomes a process of transformation. This changes the way we approach our spiritual journey. A point that deepens this awareness appears in Hebrews, when we learn that the Son is the radiance of God's glory. This shows that the image is not symbolic, it is real, living, active. We were designed to reflect this reality in the world, not by human effort, but by an inner work. This truth starts to push our heart to understand that this image carries a function. As this awareness settles, a natural question arises within us. If we were created in the image of the Son, what mission does this image carry? There is purpose, there is responsibility, there is direction. And it is this perception that leads us directly to the next level. The revelation reaches a new level when we realize that man was not created merely to exist, but to govern. In Genesis, God gives man authority over the earth. This is not a symbol, it is purpose. We were not made to live cornered, but with spiritual authority. This understanding begins to change the way we see our role here. The weight of this calling appears clearly in Psalms, when we read that God crowned man with glory and honor, placing him over the works of his hands. This authority is not born from the ego, but from divine trust. There is a spiritual delegation behind it. We are placed in a position of responsibility, not arrogance, and this begins to reveal the seriousness of what was entrusted to us. It is crucial to understand that this dominion was not just physical, but spiritual. In Genesis, man receives the mission to subdue the earth. This speaks of order, balance, invisible government. It was not just about working the land, but about establishing a reality aligned with heaven. This awareness naturally leads us to realize that there is a conflict in this sphere. Another important detail emerges when we realize that this government was not independent. Man was never created to govern separate from God. In Psalms, we understand that all authority comes from Him. This shows that our strength has always been in the connection. We do not govern alone, we govern from the presence. And when this connection is affected, something breaks. From there, a silent unease is born. If we were created to govern and today we live below that, what happened along the way? This question does not bring guilt, it brings revelation. And it is exactly this answer that leads us to the next level of the journey. Not all true change starts with actions. There is a silent work that happens within the soul before manifesting outwardly. That's why so many people get frustrated trying to change behavior but ignore the root of the problem. Spiritual life begins in the intentions, motivations, and hidden desires. The Word teaches that God dwells in the heart and not just in the actions, as we see in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3. This reveals that heaven's focus has always been on the inner self. There is a profound difference between trying to improve and allowing oneself to be transformed. Human effort might discipline the exterior, but only the life of God can renew man from the inside out. The Bible makes this clear by stating that the natural man does not understand the things of the Spirit, according to the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 2. This shows that this work is not just mental, it is spiritual. It is not control, it is surrender. It is not pressure, it is life operating silently. Many people live emotionally exhausted because they insist on carrying battles that were never meant to be won alone. The soul gets worn out when it tries to fight spiritual forces with human tools. God does not call anyone to live exhausted, but to live dependent. True strength is born from surrender, not resistance. It is precisely at this point that the heart begins to understand that it needs a new kind of direction. The center of spiritual life is not in rituals, but in internal governance. God desires to occupy the place of command, the space where decisions are born even before they become actions. The Bible shows this principle by stating that Christ wants to make his home in the heart, as the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3 says. This dominion is not imposed, it is received. Only those who make space experience this inner government. From this understanding, something begins to reorganize within the soul. Priorities silently shift, the gaze becomes more sensitive. Choices start to carry a spiritual weight that did not exist before. It is not about perfection, but about direction. This inner awakening prepares the heart to face a battle that has always been present, but which few recognize clearly. Not every conflict is visible. Many of the greatest wars happen in the silence of thoughts. The flesh builds arguments, creates justifications, and tries to normalize what weakens the soul. The Bible clearly describes this internal war in the letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, when speaking of the opposition between the flesh and the spirit. This is not a symbolic concept, it is a daily experience, and noticing it is the first step to not being dominated by it. The greatest danger is not having weaknesses, but hiding them. What is brought into the light loses strength, but what is hidden takes deeper root. God does not work with masks, He works with truth. It is not about exposing oneself to be ashamed, it is about releasing to be healed. This spiritual principle changes the way we deal with ourselves, and it makes the heart abandon the internal theater that keeps many souls trapped. There is a common confusion between discipline and harshness. Many people believe that being spiritual means becoming cold, rigid, or inflexible. But the Spirit of God does not harden, He organizes. The letter to the Hebrews, chapter 12, teaches that God corrects those He loves. This shows that divine discipline does not destroy, it builds. It does not humiliate, it heals. It does not condemn, it restores. This understanding changes the way the soul views correction. Putting the flesh to death does not mean rejecting one's own existence. It means denying the rule of a system that tries to command life by impulses. It is not a war against oneself, but against a nature that wants to take control. This rejection is not born from fear, but from clarity. The more the heart understands what destroys, the less it desires it, and this liberation does not happen through imposition, but through revelation. Little by little, something powerful begins to happen. The spirit starts to have more room. Spiritual consciousness sharpens. Decisions begin to be filtered by a new inner criterion. A new sensitivity is emerging within the soul. And it is exactly this development that opens the doors to a deeper experience of daily living with God. The presence of God is not a place. It is a perception. It is not something sought with physical effort, but something developed with spiritual sensitivity. Many live as if God were distant, when in fact He is closer than they think. The Bible reveals this reality by teaching that Christ lives in us, according to the letter to the Colossians, chapter 1. This changes the entire logic of Christian life, because it transforms distance into intimacy. With this awareness, behavior begins to align almost without effort. It is not religious pressure, it is spiritual perception. It is not fear of making mistakes, it is the desire to stay close. The heart begins to identify what strengthens the spirit and what feeds the flesh. This discernment is not learned merely by listening, it is born in the practice of daily communion. Intimacy starts to generate maturity. The inner world becomes more organized. Confusion loses strength. Anxiety quiets down. The soul begins to understand that living in the Spirit is not heavy, it is light. It is not the absence of struggles, it is the presence of direction. It is not a life without problems, it is a life with government. This difference completely changes the experience of faith. In this environment, prayer stops being a protocol and becomes conversation. Reading the Bible stops being an obligation and becomes nourishment. Silence stops being empty and becomes an encounter. The Word reveals this path practically when it speaks about walking in the Spirit in the letter to the Romans, chapter 8. This is not a distant concept. It is a daily journey accessible to any willing heart. As time passes, the soul realizes that spiritual life is not made up of great explosions, but of small daily adjustments. The presence of God begins to be noticed in the simple details. small decisions start to carry an eternal weight. This awareness prepares the heart to understand an even deeper level of dependence and spiritual direction. As we understand the beginning of all things, it becomes clear that the true focus of the spiritual conflict was never in heaven, but on earth. In Genesis 1:1-2, the Word reveals that the earth became formless and empty, plunged into darkness. This shows that there was a real rupture in the original plan, something that required direct action from the Creator. When our mind opens to this detail, the Lord's teaching in Matthew 6:9-10 begins to make sense, where Jesus teaches us to pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. This reveals that heaven is already aligned, but the earth remains the battleground that needs to be spiritually conquered. This dimension leads us to realize that the very action of the serpent is linked to the earth. In Genesis 3:14, it is said that it would crawl and eat dust. This confirms that the enemy's territory is not the eternal heavens, but precisely the environment that God gave man to administer. Looking at Revelation 12:7-10, we understand that there is a real clash connected to the heavens that relates to the earth. This reveals that many spiritual conflicts happen in this environment and are not just symbols, but spiritual realities directly linked to the government over creation. And so, as this truth deepens, the heart begins to realize that if the problem is on earth, the answer must also manifest on earth. And this naturally leads the mind to the topic of the authority entrusted to man. When we examine Genesis 1:26-28, we understand that man was not created to live passively. The command was clear: dominate, subdue, be fruitful, and govern. These words reveal that authority was part of man's essence from the beginning, and not something that would arise later. Our mind aligns with this truth, and it becomes evident that the image of God in man also carries the idea of representation. God wanted to express his government through man, showing that spiritual authority was not given to angels, but to humanity, according to the eternal plan. Observing Genesis 2:15, we understand that man was placed in the garden to cultivate and keep, or guard. This reveals that there was already a spiritual responsibility for vigilance and protection. It was not just care, but defense of a territory that could be threatened. This vision matures, and it becomes clear that God chose to act through man. Even though he could defeat Satan alone, he decided to involve his creation in this process. The plan was always for creature to face creature within the order established by God himself. And as this understanding deepens, the heart begins to realize that this authority was not simply annulled, but affected by the fall, preparing the ground to understand what truly happened after sin. When we analyze Genesis 3, we understand that the entry of sin did not destroy God's plan. The fall of man altered the human condition, but it did not erase the eternal purpose. What seemed to be the end, in fact, became the beginning of a greater restoration. Our view contemplates Psalms 8, and we realize that even after the fall, God continued to declare man as crowned with glory and honor. This shows that the plan revealed in Genesis 1 was never revoked, not even after sin. In Hebrews 2:5-8, we understand that the world was not handed over to angels, but to man. Even when all seemed lost, man's position in God's plan remained the same. What changed was the condition, not the calling. Meditating on Hebrews 2:8-9, we understand that Jesus appears as the fulfillment of what man failed to achieve. Where there was failure, restoration arises. Where there was a fall, there is continuity of the plan, not replacement. And so, as this truth is revealed, the mind prepares to understand that the story is not about cancellation, but about continuity, and this opens a natural door to deepen the understanding of the revelation of the second Adam and the restoration of the original purpose. Many people grow up thinking that spiritual slavery is for weak people, but the truth is that the most dangerous captivity is the one the person doesn't even notice. It's not visible chains, it's a mindset. It's living, thinking one is free, but always being pulled by the same weaknesses, the same patterns, the same falls. The Bible shows in John 8 that everyone who practices sin becomes its slave. This is not about guilt, it is about spiritual reality. The enemy doesn't need to destroy someone all at once. Sometimes he just needs to keep the person too busy to pray, too tired to seek, too distracted to listen. This is modern captivity, living spiritually anesthetized. And the more natural this becomes, the less the soul misses God's presence. Little by little, the heart gets used to the weight and calls it normal life, without realizing it is imprisoned. Satan prefers a comfortable imprisoned believer over an angry non-believer because the captive doesn't react. He conforms, he adapts, and this creates a dangerous feeling of everything is fine, when in fact the spirit is slowly weakening. It is not a visible attack, it is a silent prison. The most alarming thing is that this type of captivity doesn't start with major sins, but with small compromises. A distraction here, a justification there, an inner voice saying it's not that serious. And in this, what seemed small gradually becomes an internal structure. The heart no longer fights as before. The conscience no longer hurts as before. The prison solidifies. But this reality does not exist to cause despair. It exists to awaken. Because no one is freed from what they don't recognize. And exactly there begins the transition to the next understanding. The cross was not just a symbol of suffering, it was a place of transfer of authority. In Colossians chapter 2, the word reveals that Jesus disarmed the principalities and powers, triumphing over them publicly. This means something much deeper than most imagine. The enemy lost the legal right over what he previously dominated. The cross not only forgave sins, it broke invisible spiritual chains. The problem is living as if this were just a beautiful theory. They sing about the cross, they talk about the cross, but they continue to walk like slaves, not for lack of God's love, but for lack of revelation. Freedom is not just something that happened 2,000 years ago. It is something that needs to be lived every day on the inside. The cross is not just a historical event, but a daily experience. It cuts the power of the flesh, destroys the dominion of the natural soul, and makes room for the governance of the spirit. It's not about suffering, it's about dying to what dominates us and living by what sets us free. Many people try to overcome temptations with willpower. Others try to overcome habits with human discipline. But none of this compares to the spiritual power of someone who understands what truly happened on the cross. It is not a fight. It is positioning. It is not effort, it is spiritual alignment. When this truth begins to come alive in the heart, something changes in the way one walks. It is no longer a believer trying to survive. It is someone who begins to walk under a restored authority. And this prepares the ground to understand something even deeper. The kingdom of God is not a poetic concept. It is a real, active, and living government. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus taught us to pray saying, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." This is not a symbolic phrase. It is a cry for heaven to govern the earth, starting within the human heart. The kingdom does not begin in the world. It begins in the soul. Many people live their faith as if God were only a rescue in emergencies. But when the kingdom truly governs, He is not plan B, He is the center. He is not the last resort, He is the main direction. And this government is not external. It is not an imposition. It is an inner surrender that changes absolutely everything. Watchman Nee taught that the great spiritual conflict is not between God and the devil, but between the kingdom of God and the rule of the self. Because as long as the self rules, the kingdom is not fully manifested. But when the heart surrenders, heaven begins to organize what was once chaos. The kingdom changes the way one thinks, reacts, and decides. It establishes a new internal logic. What once seemed normal begins to seem strange. What once seemed impossible begins to become natural. This is not religion, it is real transformation. Adam failed in the first project, but God never abandoned his plan. The Bible reveals in the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, that Jesus is called the last Adam and the second man. This means he came to restore what was lost, not just to save people from hell, but to rescue the original purpose of the human being, to live under the direct government of God. Jesus did not just come to show us a path. He came to become the path. He did not just teach, he embodied the standard. He walked in obedience, he lived in dependence, he walked in total submission to the Father. Everything that man should have lived, he lived perfectly. Christ did not arise as an alternative to human failure, but as the fulfillment of God's eternal project. In him, we see how a man full of God lives, how he reacts, how he chooses, how he walks. And this changes everything. The big issue is that many people admire Jesus, but do not follow him. They like the miracles, but avoid the confrontation. They love the promises, but flee the path. But God's plan was never just for Jesus to replace us, but for him to introduce us into a new life. And it is exactly here that something extraordinary begins to make sense. Redemption is not just being forgiven, it is being repositioned. In Romans chapter 5, the Bible shows that through one man, many become righteous. This is not just spiritual status, it is restoration of identity. It is returning to the place we should never have left, living in union with God. Many think that being saved is just going to heaven, but God's plan has always been deeper. He wants heaven to govern the earth again through transformed lives. And this transformation is not cosmetic, it is structural. It changes the way one thinks, desires, and chooses. The work of redemption gives us back not just a position, but a responsibility. God does not want merely clean children. He wants children filled with his Spirit. He does not want people surviving. He wants people expressing his life. Redemption rescues purpose, not just destiny. It not only removes us from guilt, it repositions us to live something greater. The heart begins to understand that it was not saved only from something, but for something. And when this begins to be understood, a new consciousness is born. The church is not a building, it never was. In Ephesians 1, the Bible reveals that the church is the body of Christ and the fullness of him who fills all in all. This means that it was called to express God's authority on earth. It is not a social institution, it is a living spiritual organism. Many see the church as a place of comfort, but God's plan has always been confrontation. Confrontation against darkness, against lies, against invisible domains. The church was not created to hide from the world, but to bring light where there is darkness. Nee taught that the true church does not depend on human strength, but on spiritual authority. When it understands who it is in God, it stops defending itself and begins to advance, not with violence but with spiritual authority. The spiritual world reacts when the church takes a stand. Chains are broken, patterns fall, minds are freed, the environment changes. It is not noise, it is spiritual weight. And when this awareness begins to establish itself, something even greater begins to be revealed. Inside every person, there is a silent tension that few can explain in words. It's like wanting to please God, but feeling internal pulls in the opposite direction. The Bible explains this in Galatians chapter 5, when it says that the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit desires what is contrary to the flesh. It is not poetry, it is daily spiritual reality. Anyone who desires to walk with God has felt this contradiction internally. The mind understands what is right, but the heart wavers. The will decides, but the body resists. This war is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that spiritual life exists there. Where there is no fight, there is usually no life. The flesh is not just the physical body, but an independent nature that wants to live without depending on God. It wants to decide alone, react alone, choose alone, and as long as it governs, the spirit is stifled. That's why the victory is not to negotiate with the flesh. It is to remove it from the throne. The Holy Spirit does not work by shouting, but by convincing. He does not push, he leads, he does not force, he attracts. The sensitive heart perceives when a decision is being born from the flesh or the spirit. This perception does not come from nowhere. It is born from intimacy. And the clearer this battle becomes, the more the soul begins to understand that there is only one real way to victory. Winning in spiritual life has nothing to do with brute force. In Romans 8, it is written that those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. This completely changes the logic of victory. It is not about running faster, it is about following better. It is not about trying harder, it is about trusting more. Many people try to control their own spiritual life with human effort. They make promises, create goals, criticize themselves, get frustrated. This cycle is exhausting because the flesh was not made to sustain God's work. It breaks, it fails, it gives up. The Spirit, however, sustains what He leads. According to Watchman, the more someone tries to win alone, the more they move away from true victory. The secret is not to fight better, but to surrender more deeply. When the soul stops competing with God and starts cooperating, the weight disappears. Dependence is not weakness. It is spiritual intelligence. It is recognizing that the source was never within oneself. It is understanding that spiritual autonomy is a pleasant but dangerous illusion. True freedom is born from divine direction, and it is exactly this kind of life that reveals what few can see. If this content is opening your eyes, subscribe to the channel to keep receiving this kind of revelation that transforms the way you see the gospel.